Good morning. Good morning. It is Monday. Today is Monday, August 15th. Oh my God, really? Already? Yes, August 15th. It's going very quickly, but what a wonderful summer I'm having. I hope you're having a wonderful summer. I just spent the weekend upstate in the country, in nature, and it felt wonderful to be out and about, out in nature. And it's interesting because today I am expanding upon the topic of death and dying. And it was interesting to see how right now in the summertime, everything is so alive. Nature, it's so green, and the trees are endless, and the grass was amazing. It was just, the sun, the sky, everything was so alive and beautiful. And we know very well that in the Northeast, at least, in this part of the world, once summer passes, we move into the fall. And the fall, literally, we start to fall, right? Leaves start to fall, things start to shift and change. And so we move more towards a season of dying as we enter the fall. And then the winter. The winter is the great freeze, for sure, in the Northeast again. Not everywhere. And yet, still, in every country, for the most part, there are shifts of weather, there are changes in temperature. There are differences. Things arise, enliven, grow, blossom, and then they change. We change seasons. And in very much the same way, I want to bring you good morning. Whoever's here, say good morning. I don't know if you signed on with StreamYard so that when you post a comment, I might be able to see your name. But if you want to say hi and let me know who's here, I would greatly appreciate it. So I was just saying that I was in the country this weekend and enjoying nature because everything is so alive. Hey, Paula, Elise, hi, good morning. Hi, Elise, nice to see you. Okay, yeah, so you signed on with StreamYard. Thank you for doing that. I figured out how I can hook up with who's showing up if you sign on through StreamYard. So I was just sharing how this past weekend I was upstate. Nice to see you too, love. Nice to see you too. Thank you for being here. I was upstate New York and enjoying nature, enjoying the vibrancy of summer. And it reminded me of how we live in seasons come and go, and how the summertime is vibrant and it's alive and we feel fully alive. And I thought that I would bring in the analogy and also the comparison to what happens to us, right? Usually in the summertime, we're excited. In the Northeast, at least it gets warmer. We want to be outside. And then we know soon thereafter that the fall will come. And then in the fall, things start to die. There's a process, a regeneration, a recycling process, very much connected to what I interpret what our experience as humans is in death and dying. Now, I don't know what happens after we die. I've not died yet, although I think we do die and are reborn every single morning as we go to bed and arise again in the morning. And yet still there is this great mystery of what happens in our death. Where do we go? What happens? And most importantly, how do we deal with this topic of death and dying, whether we are confronted for ourselves, but also for our loved ones? And so today I wanted to take a little bit of time and interact. And Elise, please feel free to ask and comment as much as you like. I really want to get this moving in an interactive manner, whether it's the two of us or there are others who join us. And the first thing I like to do is I like to review what I brought up the week before. And so last week, I talked to you about this book, The 5 Invitations. It's a wonderful book by Frank Ostaseski. Really amazing book. I recommend it highly. And not just for death and dying, but also because there's so much wisdom in this book, and his perspective is so beautiful about what death can bring to us as the living. So last week I spoke about or shared with you all, and even in my video newsletter, about the 5 invitations, right? So what are they? He talks about the 5 invitations as being relevant guides to living life of integrity and a life well lived. And here are the 5 invitations again. Number 1, he says in his book, don't wait. So, meaning while we're alive, to not wait. What are we waiting for, really? And it's true. It's true that sometimes there are moments where there are moments of pause, there are moments of repose. I think in the way that he means it, though, is to not wait to live your life. So he goes on to say, our lives are not solid and fixed. Knowing this intimately is how we prepare for death and for loss of any kind, and how we come to fully embrace constant change. We are not just our past, we are becoming. We can release grudges, we can forgive. We can free ourselves of resentment and regret before we die. And I just love that because, gosh, I don't know about you, but I don't want to live with regret and grievances. We have all gone through hard things in our lives, some of us more than others. But to live with the regret, to live with the resentment, literally shifts our physiology, literally changes how we vibrate on a molecular level. So it's very much related to our physiology, how we are feeling, and these recurring issues that come up in our lives, whether they show up as headaches, whether they show up as impatience, which a lot of the time when we become impatient in life is really a reflection of how we feel about ourselves, that we are not really patient with ourselves. Hi, good morning. Whoever's here, if you want to say hi, I would love to see your name or just a little hello. I love to know who's online when you show up. You have to sign up with StreamYard so that when you respond, I can see your name in the comments on my end. So if you want, I would love to know if anybody else wants to sign on. So to really focus on releasing grudges, to learn to forgive. And I have a great forgiveness meditation that I want to share with you at the end of our call today, which has helped me tremendously to just kind of release, let go, to not hold on anymore to anything that I might deem that someone else has done to me. I don't want to be angry. I don't want to live my life angry. I mean, it is so glorious to not be angry and to not hold on to resentment. I know personally that I am healthier. It's not as if things don't show up every now and then, but the bottom line, the baseline for how I want to live is to really live in happiness. I want to be happy. I choose to be happy. I wake up and I'm happy no matter the condition that I find myself in. I find it much, much easier and worthwhile to live from that perspective of happiness. Yeah, true. Impatience feels like anger inside. Yes, Elise, I agree. It does for me too. Forgiveness and gratitude arise together, coexist. Yes, I love that. I just had a memory right now of how when I can forgive, when I'm in my forgiveness meditation, that gratitude naturally arises. And I wonder, Elise, if you know any, if you have any insight on this comment based on your work as a biodynamic craniosacral therapist, if there's any connection neurologically that you might know beyond what I do in terms of how forgiveness and gratitude arise together, what happens in the brain that those two arise together on a more scientific end. I know that you have a ton of knowledge in that area. Anyways, I'm just putting that out there. Thank you for your comment. Okay, number 2 of the 5 invitations. So number 1 was don't wait, right? Fully live your life, forgive, move forward, don't hold on to grudges. Number 2, we talked about welcome everything, push away nothing. And the author, Frank Ostaseski, says accepting life as is means that we make peace with things as they are rather than trying to force them to be the way we want them to be and getting frustrated that we can't. Instead of spinning a story that we then try to live into, we open to a way things are and accept that we are completely human. So, welcome everything, push away nothing in this context means to accept life as it is. And how beautiful is it to be able to accept life as it is without trying to change and fix and arrange? For me, that was a huge revelation. Bend, don't break. Yeah, exactly. Bend, don't break. Oh my God, I'm going to crack my back. That's right. So, being more bendy, in a sense, being more flexible. And I think the same thing occurs when we're more flexible. We also tend to get less reactive. So, in that sense, our nervous system is not on pins and needles. Our nervous system is a trainable system. And we could talk a little bit also about how the vagus nerve gets into the image, the wandering nerve gets into that realization, that knowledge that when you are more flexible, when you bend and you don't break, flexibility encourages tolerance. Flexibility encourages more compassion, patience. So when we're more tolerant, we just automatically become more patient and we don't get so involved with what everyone else has to say. You kind of take a step back and you observe, you listen. And what happens when we do that is that we can notice our own reactive ideas, thoughts, emotions arise. And that's completely normal in human beings. We have reactions, we do have emotional uh, upheavals, things arise. The distinction in being present and to practice bending and flexibility is that we don't react, we pause. And oh my goodness, what a lesson is it to pause, to just learn to pull back and to pause, to slow down. That's been one of the hugest um, teachings and a tool that I've integrated in my life that has truly saved me so many times from saying or doing anything that might not have been the right thing to say. There is such a thing as not saying the right thing, right? So that we go back to discipline, we go back to personal responsibility. And I think it's the same thing with this topic of death and dying, to be able to sit with it, to pause with the inevitable change that will come, which is death, which is dying. So, in the way that he meant it, welcome everything, accepting life as is means that we make peace with things as they are. The third invitation from his book says, bring your whole self to the experience. And here's what he says. For me, that's a really important invitation because so much of the time we bring ourselves half in. Oh, actually, I that's my perspective. Sorry. That's what I said. Right. We only bring half of who we are into a conversation so much of the time. And one of the ways that we know that's true is because we are distracted. This is a big deal for me. For example, I have a really hard time. I've had to train myself. So, what I find difficult at this time in life is that people use their cell phones as an extension of their arm. So, mostly they have their cell phones, and it's very hard to put the cell phone down. They put the cell phone on their lap, they put the cell phone on the table, sometimes face up. If they're trying to be better, they put it face down. One of the great things this weekend where I went is that there was no Wi-Fi. So I had zero connection to the internet. I could just lay around and read. I did a ton of reading, but be in nature and be undisturbed. So really notice in your life, do you really show up fully in? If you go for dinner with someone, if you're with someone on the phone, are you scrolling at the same time? Or is it possible for you to just really put the technology down, put the phone down, and bring your whole self to the conversation? Oh my God, that in itself is an entire healing mechanism, because what we most want, and all of us, this is true, we want to be heard, we want to be seen, we want to be acknowledged. And the phone has created this separation, this ongoing distraction where, I don't know, is it a fear of missing out that we're constantly thumbing the phone? Just to learn to put the phone down more and more and more, and to find those opportunities in your life to go away for even one day, to get out of town or go to the beach, and don't bring your phone or leave your phone in your bag, so that you can really disconnect and notice how much distraction impacts your health, impacts your nervous system. Because the phone and thumbing the phone and looking at all these social media outlets really trains us into becoming more distracted. It's the fear of missing out, the FOMO thing, where you're constantly looking, and then it becomes just an addiction. It's like smoking, it's like drinking. It's pretty much the same thing. You get super addicted because you need a hit. You need a hit of what's going on. And a lot of the time, unless you're connected to really good outlets, media outlets, and interesting stuff, it's a lot of nonsense. So, invitation number 3, to bring yourself fully in your life, to be fully present in your life and aware and with others all of the time when you're with them, right? Number 4, find a place of rest in the middle of things. I love that. We often think of rest as something that will come to us when everything else in our lives is complete. At the end of the day, when we take a bath, we go on a holiday, or get through all our to-do lists, we imagine we can only find rest by changing our circumstances. Finding a place of rest isn't about adding another task to your already too long to-do list, nor does it mean napping more during your workday. Rest is a choice to be alert, to bring your attention to this moment. And finally, number 5 of the 5 invitations, the author invites us to cultivate the don't know mind. That can also be described as beginner's mind. Ignorance is usually thought of as the absence of information, being unaware, but it's more than just not knowing. Ignorance means that we know something, but it's the wrong thing. Ignorance is misperception. But don't know mind represents something else entirely. It is beyond knowing and not knowing. So don't know mind would bring us back into this sensation, into this space of taking a step back, like to really observe again, taking the observer's position, the beginner's mind. Even when we think that we know something, to just pull back and to be in a state of don't know mind, beginner's mind. And we can segue that thought, that 5th invitation, into what Dr. Elisabeth Kübler-Ross has written some time ago. Elise, I feel like my phone is an extension of my nervous system in an always on mode. Wow. Yeah. That's amazing. So good awareness on that one. And also, like, is it possible for you to disconnect from it being an extension of your nervous system? That's a really interesting perspective, because I see it as an extension of my body, of my hand, but of the nervous system for sure. Makes perfect sense. So what would happen if you went in the turn off mode? As you well know, you get to settle in. You get to become more flexible with what is in the present moment. The other thing with the phone is that we're not here. We're distracted by something else. And that works so fast in our minds. That is kind of like, the new way of being is the new way of living. The new normal has become being stuck with our cell phones and constantly connecting with that tool, which can be a very useful tool. And at the same time, it decalibrates our entire nervous system. Yes, I do regularly. It's a practice. It is a practice. Thanks, Elise. All right, so cultivating don't know mind. I want to take this into another topic around death and dying that was written. It's a book or a study rather that was done by Elisabeth Kübler-Ross, very popular writer and author, magnificent woman. And she looked at death and dying. She did a study on the topic of death and dying because she found that in too many hospitals and hospices, no one was really trained in understanding how to deal with death and dying. And she too has a 5-stage system. In her case, they're not the 5 invitations as Frank Ostaseski discussed. She has 5 stages of grief, which you may have heard about before, which is denial, stages of grief for death, in death. First, there's denial, when a loved one dies, often. Anger, bargaining, depression, and finally, hopefully, acceptance. So I wanted to go through those 5 stages of grief to elaborate upon Ostaseski's work of the 5 invitations. This is a different perspective in how we might deal, or for many of us, not deal with death and dying. So what she talks about is how many people in modern society, that's us, are afraid of death and seek to prolong their lives through medical intervention at any cost. Death is treated as something shameful that adults hide from children, and at their funerals, not so much now, but then, dead bodies are made to look as alive as possible. She suggests that paying more attention to the feelings of the dying patient might help rid them of some fear. So she's really talking from the perspective of the person that is dying. So she goes on to say that doctors, and this is true still today for sure, are trained to prolong life even after it has become painful and intolerable for a terminal patient. She wonders whether fear of death leads to the continuation of warfare around the world as people wage war in an explicit attempt to defy death by causing it in others. That's pretty deep. I find that super interesting. She comprised information she gathered from interviews with many terminally ill and dying patients. She worked closely with theology students and doctors to help open communication between the patients and their healthcare providers about what they could expect from the process of dying. So here she goes through the stages. So the first stage most people experience when they receive a terminal illness diagnosis is denial. So this is the person, you have terminal cancer, you have a few months left to live, 6 months left to live. This is what she's addressing here. She says that patients that are diagnosed with a terminal illness go into denial, and they assume that there must have been a mistake made in their diagnoses, or that alternative medicine can cure them, which we certainly know can help and even cure for sure. Some patients continue to experience denial right up until their deaths. She advises support givers to allow patients to experience denial and not to continually try to prove them wrong or argue with them about their prospects. Then she says that denial is followed by anger. As the patient lashes out at loved ones and hospital staff, this stems from a realization that the patient will not be able to finish what he or she wanted, and that plans must be cut short by the impending death. Kübler-Ross advises allowing patients in this phase as much control as possible so that they can begin to feel that they are in charge of their remaining life. And I don't know about you, but I have worked with a handful of terminally ill clients, patients in my practice, where essentially they came to me at the end where they felt that there was, I mean, they knew they had cancer, they were terminally ill, they knew that death was coming. And one of the reasons that these people came to see me was because they could not release or let go a piece of their resentment or anger. And they came to me to see if we could work together to do some healing sessions and allow them a space where they can voice their sensation and work it out through their body, work it out emotionally so that they might be able to release their attachment to anger or resentment that they still held on to in their lives. And that taught me so much as a practitioner to do this type of work with them, because for many of them, it was possible to release impending anger because we were able to locate, even at an advanced stage of cancer, where they were holding on to these emotions in their bodies. And we were able to allow for their bodies to speak their pain, to speak their anger, to speak their resentment. And instead of thinking of the person or the situation that the patient wanted to forgive or move on from, what happened was that we were able to go into the body, process the emotion through the body, and the person, her or himself, was the one that was forgiven. It wasn't really about the other person or situation, it was about them. And so we were able to go in the body and process from a very holistic and healing way to invite the possibility of healing their spirit now, right now in this moment, through their bodily sensations. And of course, what happens is when you acknowledge where the pain is in your body, you're able to bring forgiveness. You're able to bring love. You're able to bring healing to yourself. And in so doing, of course, that releases around you in totality, because it's never really about the other person. I know that sounds counterintuitive, and it's also true. Yeah, Elise, it is transformative. So that was a huge gift for me to have to work with several, and mostly it was cancer. It was terminally ill cancer patients who passed shortly after we went through the process of releasing their attachment to their own pain. Essentially, it's pain, it's anger, and it comes from a very, very deep place. From usually it's something that we have lived with throughout our lives that keeps arising in our lives, and we tend to get in these similar situations with people, whether they're partners or friends, even colleagues at work. We tend to surround ourselves with people who tend to bring up our triggers, because that's a big part of why we're here. I think that is the part of human life, is to move through, or as I like to call it, you're burning your karma. You're walking through the valley of death all the time, every day. Usually something will arise that gives you an opportunity to check in and to see, oh, wow, why did that make me feel uncomfortable? Or why does this person rub me the wrong way? Or what is it about this situation that I can't let go? And the more we focus on healing ourselves and forgiving, then it automatically heals the relationship with the other, because we are at the cusp of all of this. Wherever, that expression, wherever you go, there you are. And so it's constantly us that has to come back. This is why I'm such a huge proponent of personal development, of spiritual awakening, of these consciousness practices, of deep meditation practices, because it helps us to go inside and to really get to know who we are based on where we come from, the type of environment we were brought up in, especially, and how did we evolve from little infants, little people, into adults who are wounded and hurt. And my perspective is really to, yes, compassionate self-awareness, 100%, Elise. I'm loving this conversation. Thank you. And furthermore, when we're able to appease and to soften, it's not just that our mental and emotional state gets better, is that our physical state gets better. 100%. We tend to, if we do this continuously, and this is a continuous practice, of course, it's waking up in the morning, heart, hand on belly, thankful, gratitude. First thing, gratitude. Jump into the gratitude boat, y'all. Jump into the gratitude boat. Just be grateful. Find something to be grateful for. And it's really not that hard to find something to be grateful for. And so the more we practice this relationship with gratitude, we are shifting how we vibrate internally. So what that means is that physiologically, on a real molecular level, we tend to slow down the vibrational frequency, the nervous system that you were talking about, Elise. We start to balance, regulate the nervous system. And so when we go out in the world, we tend to be calmer. That's why I always invite all of my clients to slow down when they walk. Just slow down. Just even as they leave my office, I invite you to slow down. Take your time walking to the elevator. Change your rhythm with life. Because if we change our rhythms with life, life changes her rhythm with us. And she embraces us wholeheartedly. And it gives us a chance to look up and to look at the trees and to look up at the sky and to go, oh, wow, another reason to be grateful. The sky is still above us. The simplest things. And I always find these in my practice to come up as the most difficult things for people to embrace. Tiny baby steps. Listen deeply. Go inward to do the work. So back to Dr. Kübler-Ross's 5 stages of grieving, we are on stage number 3, and she calls the next stage bargaining. Patients may try to bargain with a higher power or with their doctors to prolong their lives. According to Kübler-Ross, this bargaining generally stems from a sense of guilt. Patients should be listened to closely in order to help them find closure and to have a sense of what is really bothering them. So I guess part of what I shared before is maybe no, the clients that came to see me were not bargaining. Actually, I was thinking back, they weren't bargaining. They were at the next stage, which is either the next stage she expresses is depression. That's the next one. Or finally, the last stage is acceptance. So patients who came to see me who were basically at the end of their rope, there was nobody else to be seen. And because I do a lot of this type of spiritual healing work, I was really the last person they saw, because for a lot of them, they don't believe in spiritual healing work. But either their sister, their brother, their friend who was already seeing me suggested that they come see me, and they did, because they were at the end. They tried everything and they figured, well, this healing thing can't hurt me any more than where I am. So they came. And when these patients came to see me, a lot of them were in a state of depression, not depressed as in clinically depressed, but in an overall sense of, it wasn't so much depression as basically they gave up. They were at a stage in their lives where they gave up. They were at the end and they said, well, whatever, nothing else works, and I'm still having these emotions and these sensations. So I figure I'm going to come see you because I'm dying anyways, basically. But to be able to tap in to someone who's dying and to help them to realize that they can release their resentment. And a lot of the time, these patients came, they were older, and the resentment that they held inside of themselves was for their parents who were already dead, or a sibling that was already dead. So that was super interesting as well, because they were holding on to stuff from their childhood, traumas, of course, that had been inflicted upon them. And these people in their lives were dead already. So to never underestimate the power of the human heart, because the heart can be bruised and hurt and beaten up, and it can also heal. It can truly, fully heal the entire mind, body, spirit of a person. The heart is the key to it all. And again, of course, it's overly used and probably super understated, but it really is about love. And so when these patients were able to connect to a deeper part to themselves and to really take a moment to love themselves fully, to appreciate who they were, even at the end, it gave them a chance to exhale. And it gave them a chance to say, I'm going to forgive myself for having held on to this emotion or anger or pain for so long, and I'm going to let them go. I'm going to let them go. And so there's this beautiful thing that happens in consciousness, in the spirit, in the depth of our hearts and souls when we are able to let go, when we are able to forgive. And yes, Elise, as you said, it's a practice. One day at a time. We move forward one step at a time. And this is true for the rest of you who are all healthy in life, and that you might hit a brick wall somewhere. Something is hard, or you're confronted with yourself again because something happened at work and you got triggered or reacted in an habitual pattern that you recognize, but that you still responded in the same way. To slow down, to accept yourself as you are, to be kind, to allow yourself a moment to recognize how far you have come, and to essentially to rock yourself, rock yourself as if you were rocking a little baby. Open heart and open mind are related to the accept everything invitation. Exactly right. And so what do we mean by open heart and open mind? For me, I always start with the heart, because it's the other way around for me. The heart is really is what effectively connects to the mind. That's how I see it. Yes, the mind is great. And yes, we train the mind. We know how to train the mind. We know more and more about the mind. And still, I feel we don't know enough about the powers of the heart. Because in so many ways, dealing with our hearts and forgiveness and these very profound skills have been labeled and named as soft skills or as emotional skills. And the truth about it is that they are the most important skills to tap into, because these are the ones that can help to transform your mind. The mind can also help to transform the heart. In my work, from where I stand, what I have seen for 15 years as a practitioner, but 30 years as a coach and a lot of movement coaching, is that it really comes from the sensation. And when we are able to feel at that deep level, and sometimes it's a very minor thing, I would have someone rolling on a foam roller or doing a very simple exercise, and then tears would arise. The soma was ignited through the movement, and somewhere something melted. It's like the block of ice melted completely unexpectedly, and someone would start to cry because they're feeling on such a deep level. Elise says, in embryological development terms, the heart leads the mind. Then mind follows the path of the heart. Exactly. That's exactly correct. And isn't it that Well, in embryological development, the heart not only leads the mind, but is created, right? Isn't it that the heart is developed before the mind in embryological development? You're going to tell me, Elise. I can't remember exactly, but I have to go back to my books. But in essence, yes. Okay, cool. So the heart develops before the mind, right? Oh my God, there's so much to dig into here. But suffice it to say that once we start to heal our hearts, the mind inevitably follows. It's a miracle. It's an ongoing miracle. And we don't view ourselves as miracles. And I don't know why, because we are. This entire physiology, this body anatomy, morphology, we are miracles. And I don't know why we're not talking about this more frequently. Well, I'm doing it now. I'm really talking about it now. I call it magic. Yes, you and me both, Elise. It is magic. So when you can go back and see yourself as a being of magic, a mystery, a magical being, a miracle of life. We're always so amazed when a little baby is born, and then by the time the baby starts to grow, and then toddler, childhood, adolescence, oh my God, all of a sudden we forget about the miracle of that child. And so that's us. That child is us. So to continuously remember that we come essentially from nothing, and we go back to nothing, right? Dust to dust. So in our relationships with the dying, or even ourselves, what happened for me a couple of weeks ago when one of my family members passed away, it just set me straight, so to speak. It put me back on track. And I was like, oh my God, this was a younger person, very active, super healthy. You don't know what's going to happen and when it's going to happen. And I love the philosophy of going to sleep every night. This is what I personally do. And I thank my guides, and I thank nature, Mother Nature. I thank the cycle of life for having given me another day. And I say all the time when I go to sleep, if I die tonight, I will have lived a great day. And this is what I love about this mindfulness work, is to really be in the present moment. Do the best that you can at every moment of your day, even if it's going badly or you're having a hard time. We have the power to shift our state. And in shifting our states, we start to heal the deeper woundings. I just saw something on Instagram recently that said, you can change your emotional state. Yes, we have the power to do that. You can do that in the moment. However, that does not change the deep emotional wounding. And I kind of have a little bit of a different perspective to that, because if you can change your state in the moment to go from one of either victim or being triggered or anger or frustration, and you shift your pattern right in that moment, that starts to get to the new pattern of development through your life. So you start to act more like this. And as we act more grounded, connected, tolerant, open, it starts to help us deal with the deeper wounding. I'm not saying that it heals it in that moment. However, again, repetition is the mother of skill. And so the more we repeat, being in awareness of how we're feeling, that is the guide, that is the pathway to the deeper healing of those deep wounds. Because if you're softening in this moment, if you're softening in your life, you're going to get to a place within yourself that when the deep, deep wounds show up, because you've been practiced on the periphery, because you've been practiced at a superficial layer level, well, that seeps through. Right? It's the trickle down effect. It actually works in this case. So the more you practice softening on the periphery, on your superficial layers, slowly you're softening. It's going in, it's going in, it's going in. So when we get to the deep wounding that arises, and we come to the place where we can touch it, it's less reactive. There's a softening around it because we've been practicing softening the exterior. I hope this makes sense. I hope that resonates somewhere. And so Yes, the fourth stage of grief, according to Dr. Kübler-Ross, is depression. And she says this depression may stem from something the patient has already lost, such as quality of life, or it may be a preparatory depression as the patient realizes that death is now likely inevitable. She goes on to say that caretakers can try to cheer up the patient, and this may be effective, but this approach should be balanced with allowing the patient to open up about his or her real fears and anxieties. And so, in essence, what Dr. Ross is saying here, and I profoundly agree, is to allow people to feel. Allow people to feel their depression. And a big part of why people tend to stay in states of depression, and I'm not talking about dying people right now or patients who are terminally ill, I'm talking about regular people in everyday life. One of the reasons why we tend to stay in depression is because we're not moving, physically, literally moving. The best remedy for depression is movement, period. It's the best remedy for anything, really. Different layers of movement, depending on the case. Of course, I'm generalizing. However, for depression, it is about movement. And yes, sometimes we do need to have some medication to help balance us out. Absolutely. And in addition to that, I think that there's far too much medication offered to people who are depressed. I think what we need to do is to get them into action and to get them into class, moving every single day, whether it's walking. And in addition, not just moving, but moving with a group, being with other people. Because when we can make a movement, change a thought. I love that. Yes, allow them to feel and to process the feelings. Exactly. Make a movement, change a thought. That's amazing, Elise. Thank you. That's exactly right. And then if you move, and if we have these programs where people, and I believe we do have them, we have these programs where people who are depressed start to move on a daily basis in a group. What starts to happen is that the energy of the group, right? We are affected osmosisly. We are affected by the vibrational frequency, by the movement of the group. And also we start to realize in that group setting that we are not alone. And that's such a big part of being in a state of depression, is because we are isolated. We feel alone. Nobody understands us. There's a lassitude. Our bodies feel like mush. We can't move. We can't express. We're basically, in theory, when people are deeply depressed, they feel like they are dead. Of course, they're not dead. So for those of you who struggle with depression, or who have people in your life who struggle with depression, it's not easy to deal with. And there are easy, holistic, non-medicative ways of dealing with it. And again, I'm not saying that medication cannot help. Yes, it can help in relationship to shifting the way one person moves and lives in their lives. So to increase the amount of light in the person's room, right? To have more windows, things that get them connected to nature, where they can see more colors, flowers, trees, being in fresher air, drinking more water, hydrating, the very simple basics of life, and to get them into movement on a very daily basis. And what I'm talking about is 7 days a week. I'm not talking about going to the gym and lifting heavy weights 7 days a week. I'm talking about movement, nature walks every single day with a group. This has been one of the most effective ways that I've seen anyone move through depression, and with a lot of patients that have worked with me as well, get them in a movement regimen. And if you're listening to this and you are going through depression, just really take that extra step. You can reach out to me, but you can reach out to a plethora of active services out there where you can connect with a group and you can get yourself into movement, so that you start to levitate, you start to alleviate the deep darkness that you might be experiencing in depression. Yes, dancing for sure. Dancing is a great way to get into movement. Yoga is also a great way to get into movement. I have a friend, if any of you are interested, her name is Hedy Iankelevich. Hedy Iankelevich. You can find her on Instagram and on Facebook as well. And Hedy does this very interesting movement for people, and she really helps people to get into movement, but very basic, very simple movement that really helps them to get out into the world and to do things that are gentle to the body, but that are also exciting, and that there are also goals, So when you start to go into movement, you also see when you're improving, and that's super encouraging. So that starts to help with depression. So yes, movement, 1,000%. And finally, the last stage of grief that Dr. Ross talks about is to accept, the state of acceptance. She writes that for people who are terminally ill, that acceptance may be followed with a sort of retreat or withdrawal, but not one born from depression. Caretakers should keep the lines of communication open and encourage the patient to talk about his or her feelings. Patients who do this tend to die with more dignity and more at peace than those who keep their feelings bottled up inside. So to summarize, essentially, what Dr. Kübler-Ross was sharing, which was a much more clinical approach to look at the 5 stages of grief for those who are terminally ill. Maybe you have someone in your life that is terminally ill, or like me, if someone in your life unexpectedly dies, how do we deal with these 5 stages of grief ourselves? Because they also apply for those of us who remain, for those of us who continue to live on this planet. And how do we deal with our grief? Well, those 5 stages, I think, are helpful to remember and to read about. I'm going to add this information in the description of this live stream so that you might refer to them, as well as the 5 invitations from Frank Ostaseski. So I hope that this was helpful. I'm coming to the end of our live stream for today. Elise, if you have any questions or comments, please, as always, feel free to share. And I also want to invite you, whoever might be watching this on replay, to go ahead and invite your friends, invite family members, invite colleagues who you think might benefit from exploring mind-body alignment. There's a plethora of subjects that I will continue to include and dissect. And they range basically from birth to death and everything in between. Anything that has to do with how we aligned mind and body. And what does it really mean? What does it mean that I'm a mind-body alignment specialist? Well, I basically created that name for myself based on the training that I've taken throughout my life and what I have discovered, most of all, as a very active physical person who's been doing dance and martial arts, and I trained my whole life, is that to process emotions, to process trauma on a real, deep, forever, to move it through your life, to move it, to get essentially to let it process, it has to happen through the body. It's good to talk about things. That's one stage. That's one stage. So all of you who are looking at all these psychotherapists and their comments and their invitations and their insights on Instagram and everywhere on social media, that's a great place to start. I want to personally invite you to dare to go deeper and find therapists in your life who are working with the soma, with the body, somatic therapists. And what's a somatic therapist? Well, one of the styles of somatic therapy, certainly, and I'll name a few, there is the Feldenkrais method, for sure. There is, Elise is on the call with us right now. There's biodynamic sacral therapy. That is amazing. Also a somatic therapeutic approach. There is Heller work, structural integration. There is, yes, yoga can also be a somatic approach to healing for sure. Just be mindful of the type of yoga that you engage in so that it's really yoga that is not necessarily based on producing exercise, asanas, so that you're getting stronger in these poses. There's nothing wrong with that. The more somatic approach to it is always the yoga that is dealing with the breath, that starts with the foundation for what I understand all yoga stems from, which is the breath, and not so much into powering through poses, but rather to practice and deepen your relationship to your breathing, and how just breathing brings so much ease, so much peace, so much actually strengthening in the body from repose, from being a calmer. Elise, the 5 invitations have already changed my perspective on life and living. Thank you. Oh, fantastic. I'm so grateful that that's helpful. So we're coming to an end. I invite you to explore more somatic therapy. If you're dealing with anything in your life, you will find that dealing through the body will give you a new vision of what's possible for you. And it's not about powering. Somatic therapy is not about powering through. It's about quieting. It's about quieting the body and the mind. And of course, if you want to experience a somatic therapeutic approach and you are in New York or the surrounding areas, you can always come by and see me. You can book an appointment at artofalignmentacademy.com. You can find me there, book your appointment. You can also book an appointment with me and have a 30-minute complimentary consultation. So that means it's a free call that you can have with me to ask any questions you might have. And for those of you whom this is rather new, just go on there. I'll put my Calendly link in this in the information for this stream as well. And you can just book an appointment and ask questions. And I do that so that you might have a space to go deeper and ask any question that might be relevant for you, or if you have any concerns as well. Thank you for being here with me today. I really appreciate. Thank you, Elise. Thank you for your interaction. I really appreciate you. Have a wonderful, wonderful week. And I will see you next Monday, same time, same place. Bye, everyone.